Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. I'm Lee Dao, an International Student Advisor at the International Student Support Office at OCAD University. I'm pleased to introduce Elizabeth Long and Mayor McDonald's immigration lawyer from the law firm of Long Mangoji, LLP in Toronto. In today's presentations, they will talk about when you can legally work during your studies, applying for a post-graduation work permit, pathway to becoming a permanent resident, and what you do if your application is denied. But before we start, I want to acknowledge the land we're on. So OCAD University acknowledges the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original and custodians of the land on which we stand and create. Now I'm going to hand this over to Elizabeth and Mary.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. So today, Mary and we're going to go through what you need to do to become a permanent resident. But before we start, it's important for us to talk about temporary residence. What do you need to know before you get your permanent residence with regard to what you need to do to stay in status and work in Canada and get your work permit. All right, so the first thing is in order to keep your status as a student, you have to actively pursue your studies, okay? Even if your study permit is still valid, if you stop studying, actively pursuing studies, you lose your student status after 90 days of you actively stopping to actively pursue studies. Now, there are two exceptions to the rule. If you're on scheduled breaks, that's whatever is in the school calendar that normally you have breaks, that's okay. Also, if you have a special circumstance where you say, oh, you know what, I just can't attend classes this semester because let's say you're ill or your family member is ill and you need to go back, or something academically related, maybe you're not able to attend your classes this semester, you should ask your school permission to get authorized leave. You can't just unilaterally decide, okay, I'm going to take authorized leave. You have to get permission from the school. And you can get authorized leave for 150 days. After the 150 days, you'll have to, maybe if you're not going back to school, you'll have to file for visitor extension, etc. But you can get up to a semester of authorized leave. And if you do get authorized leave from the school, that is also counted as you actively pursuing studies. Now, what can you do when you're studying with regard to work? Okay, now you can work only if you are a full-time student. If you're a part-time student, you're not allowed to work at all, except in the last semester. In the last semester, you can be a part-time student and still work. Okay. When you've completed your studies, you're no longer a full-time student. At that point, you have to stop working. So when the school tells you, congratulations, you've completed your studies, at that point, you're not a student anymore. You have to stop studying. There's only one exception to the rule, and it's if you have completed your program, but you've also been accepted to another program that is just one semester away, okay? You can then, if you've been accepted to the next program, you can then work in between these programs for the most is 150 days.
Okay, so something that's very important to understand while you're here as a student is to always make sure that you have status while you're here in Canada. So what you need to do is check your permits and look at the dates that are listed on your study permit as the expiry date. look at that date right now and note it in your calendar because it's really, really important. Once you reach that expiration date, you don't have status as a student anymore, even if your program hasn't finished yet. So, for example, if your study permit expires before you complete your program of study, you will need to apply to end your study permit. And that brings, oh, that's okay. And another key thing to understand going off of that is implied status. So when you submit an application to extend your study permit, as long as you submit that application properly and before the expiry date that's listed on your permit, you'll hold what's called implied or maintained status while you're waiting for a decision on that application. So as long as you apply for the extension before your expiry date, you can continue studying in Canada while you're waiting for IRCC to actually process the extension and give you a decision. So if you have implied status, you are required to be in Canada while you wait for a decision on the new application. Otherwise, if you leave Canada, your implied status will end. And then we'd also like to talk to you about restoration. So let's say you wake up and you realize, oops, I didn't note my expiry date on my calendar, and now my study permit has expired. It's past that expiry date. So from the day that it did expire, you have a period of 90 days to apply to restore your status back to being a student. So if you lose your status, you can apply to get your status back by submitting what's called a restoration application. And it's really important to keep in mind that 90-day deadline on restoration because it's quite strict. And you have 90 days, as I said, from when your study permit expired, or if you applied to extend your study permit and you receive a refusal, you have 90 days from the date of the refusal to apply to restore your status. So just keep that in mind. If you find yourself out of status, you need to know what day you're working with the 90-day timeline. So either it's the day your study permit expired, or it's the day you received a refusal on a study permit extension. You need to get your calendar out again, figure out when the 90 days is, and make sure you apply to restore your status before then.
All right, let's talk about the postgrad work permit. Now, the first question you should ask yourself is not how do I apply for the postgrad work permit, is should I apply for the postgrad work permit? And that's because you can only qualify for the postgrad work permit once in your lifetime. Now, in the past few years, the government has, on an exceptional circumstances, allowed students to extend their postgrad work permit for 18 months. That is not normal, okay? And you can't depend on these exceptional circumstances to continue to when you graduate next year or beyond. Normally, we have to calculate how someone can qualify for permanent residence while they still have their postgrad work permit, because it can be very difficult to extend your work permit past the postgrad work permit. So the length of your postgrad work permit coincides with the length of your program if it's under 2 years. So from 8 months to 2 years, whatever the length of program of study is, that's how long your postgrad work permit is going to be. If it's 1 year, you get a 1 year work permit. If it's 16 months, you get a 16-month work permit. Now, bear in mind, we're talking about academic years, not calendar years. So sometimes if a student has 16-month program where every single semester you are studying, that could equal to 2 academic years, in which case you should be getting a 3-year work permit. Sometimes though, 16 months can equal to, let's say 3 semesters with a break one of the semesters in between. In that case, it's not really 2 academic years, it's really a 16-month program. You might only get a 16-month postgrad work permit at the end, okay? Now, if you were just doing a 1-year program, for example, and postgrad work permit is not enough time for you to get the work experience that you'll need, you may want to do another 1-year program. You can combine 1 + 1 = 3 in this case, 1-year program plus another 1-year program, it could mean that you get a 3-year work permit. You can qualify for a 3-year work permit at the end. Okay. It's not to say that everybody should do another program. Every person's circumstances is different. Some people, it's fine. If you just do a 1-year program, you should qualify for permanent residence, and that should be fine. Other people, it might be a little bit dicey. So make sure before you actually submit the postgrad work permit, you have your plan ready and you know exactly when and whether you should be applying for the postgrad work permit at that time. Now, one thing to note, postgrad work permits. After COVID, there were some COVID transitional rules, but since then, we are now getting back to the norm in which distance education, if it's more than 50% or 50% or more of your program, then you will not qualify for the postgrad work permit. So make sure that your program is mostly in-class programs, okay? Also, very important as well, make sure you maintain full-time status as a student for every single semester of your studies. The only exceptions can be the final semester, which can be part-time, or authorized leave. That's if you get, we talked about this before, you get special permission from the school and you take the entire semester off, okay? Otherwise, if you don't maintain full-time status every single semester, your postgrad work permit will likely be refused. So full-time status in every single semester. You could, some people say, well, I'm going to fail a course. I'd rather you fail. If you fail the course, but it says that you failed the course, but you still attended every single semester, you're still good. It's only if you dropped the class and it doesn't show up on your transcript, it says you dropped it, and then you didn't maintain a full-time course load, that this is going to be an issue. Okay, so now, if you do apply for your work permit, okay, you can work as soon and full-time as soon as you apply for the postgrad work permit if you apply at the right time. What is the right time? Keep in mind, this is the rule. You have to apply, while your study permit is still valid, and also within 90 days of the completion of your program, okay? The IRCC website says you can apply for the postgrad work permit within 180 days. But I tell you, if you just apply, let's say 170 days, and just apply for postgrad work permit, likely your application is going to be rejected. Why? It's because you don't have student status 90 days after you finish your program. And so in those circumstances, you have to file restoration of status, and you cannot work in that time. So keep this rule in mind. You have to apply while your study permit is still valid and within 90 days of the completion of your program. In that circumstance, you can start working as soon as you apply, even if you don't have the work permit in hand. Let's just take another look at this, okay? So, first, if you are writing your final exams, you're a full-time student then, so you can work, okay? If you're waiting for your results, still a full-time student, you can still work. The school has notified you, congratulations, you've completed your program. At that point, you're no longer a student. You have to stop working at that point. Now, you can, however, start working as soon as you've submitted your postgrad work permit, when it's within 90 days of when the school first notified you that you've completed your program, and if your study permit is still valid. At that point, you can start working full-time. All right, let's talk about permanent residence now.
So one of the important things to consider when you're looking at different permanent residence options after you graduate is the difference between high skilled and low skilled work. So as Elizabeth described, you could get your postgrad work permit after you graduate, which is going to allow you to work for anywhere in Canada for any employer, any job. And what you'll find though is that many of the programs require you to do high skilled work in order to qualify for permanent residency. So you need to understand when you're about to accept a job after you graduate, whether your work is going to be considered high skilled or low skilled by IRCC. If it's not considered high skilled, then you might run into an issue that is not going to qualify you. So how do you know if your job is high skilled or low skilled? So IRCC has categorized all the different jobs into what are called national occupation codes, or NOC codes. And the NOC codes are divided into 6 tiers, and tier 0, 1, 2, and 3 are considered high skilled, whereas tier 4 and 5 are considered low skilled. And just last year, this whole system changed, and some jobs that were previously considered low skilled are now high skilled, such as truck drivers, personal support workers, etc. And some that were previously considered high skilled are now considered low skilled. So the skill level is really important to understand when you're choosing to accept a job. And it's important to figure out what your particular skill level is for your particular situation. Sometimes we see students making the mistake of just relying on what their friends did in the past or what they see on forums or things like that. And you can end up running into big problems down the line because the laws do tend to change the laws change so much on these subjects. So you really want to have proper advice on what NOC your specific job falls under and whether it's going to qualify you for different PR routes. We've also listed all of the changes on that link there, which is on the slide, and we will be distributing the slides later on.
All right. Now I want to talk about express entry. And, this is the most popular PR category. A lot of you probably have already heard about it. So let me just first of all go over the basics about it, and we'll talk about it more in detail. So how express entry works is, first, you have to create an online profile. You get to create an online profile if you qualify under one of 3 categories: Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, or the Federal Skilled Trades class. Once you qualify, you can enter into the express entry pool. And when you enter into the pool, you can stay there for 1 year. But just because you've entered into the pool, it does not mean that you have applied for permanent residence. When you enter into the pool, you will get a series of points called the CRS points. And it means that you are interested in applying, you qualify, and you become a candidate. But the government has not yet allowed you to apply. Every maybe 2 weeks or so, normally the government has a draw where they send out invitations to apply. And it's mostly based on your points. But sometimes now they also look at things like your education, or if you know French, which is called the category-based draw. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's only after you get the invitation to apply that you can actually then apply for permanent residence under the express entry system. So, sometimes people say, well, how long is it going to take for me to get permanent residence? It depends on when you get the invitation to apply, or if you can get the invitation to apply. After you get the invitation to apply and you submit your application, normally these applications can go pretty fast. Around 6 months or so is the average. But sometimes people stay in the pool for a year, they don't get selected, and then they're kicked out of the pool. Okay, so oftentimes it's about, can you get that ITA? Okay, first let's talk about how to get into the pool. So there are 3 categories. The first category you may already be qualified, okay? You need to have 1 year of high skilled work experience that's continuous in one occupation, that's full time, at least 1,560 hours, okay? So, normally for example, if you have work experience outside of the country, or if you have self-employed work can work. If you've worked in Canada while you're studying, we can count all of that kind of work experience. After that, it looks at the language scores, education, family, etc. Most of the time, if you have the work experience, you're able to get into OCAD. Most of the time, you probably will be able to qualify under the federal skilled worker class. Now, this is just to get into the pool. It's not necessarily to get out of the pool. The second category is called the Canadian Experience class, and it's very different from the federal skilled worker class. The work experience for the Canadian Experience class is 1 year of high skilled working experience in Canada. That is when you are employed, not self-employed. You have to be employed in Canada by a Canadian employer, and it can't be while you're studying, okay? This work experience, along with you passing the language exam, will qualify you to get into the pool under the Canadian Experience class. This work experience that I just described is also the work experience that qualifies as Canadian work experience for express entry points to help you get out of the pool as well. 1 year, it can be in different occupations, but it has to be high skilled, of work experience that's not when you are a full-time student. So normally after you've graduated from school. And very importantly, you cannot be self-employed for this work. The third one I'm not going to get too much into. It's about skilled trades, those who are in the construction trades and cooks and chefs, etc. I'm not going to get into that too much, okay? All right, so say you get into the pool. How do you get the points to get out of the pool? Well, here's what we look at. So number one is age. For age, usually if you get into your 30s, your age points start dropping 5 or 6 points every year. In your 40s, it's a fast slide. By the time you're 45, the good news is your points don't go down anymore. The bad news is, unfortunately, it doesn't go down anymore because your points is 0, okay? Compared to someone who is in their 20s, whose points are 100, 110 points, that could be very significant. Education, if you have 2 programs, it doesn't matter where, but if you have 2 programs and one of those programs is a 3-year program or more, then you do get a boost in your points. Language, if you are, like most of you will have very good language points, but especially if you don't have work experience, even if you do have some Canadian work experience, normally we're looking at language points of at least for IELTS 7s in reading, writing, and speaking, 8 in listening, or CELPIP 9s. That will probably maybe enough to get you selected. Right now, the points are extraordinarily high. And so, even though before some lower points, if you have work experience, is fine. Right now, the language points can really make or break you. Relevant Canadian work experience. That's the work experience that I was talking about, which is the same as the Canadian Experience class. So 1 year of high-skilled work experience where you're not self-employed. I keep mentioning not being self-employed because I know a lot of you, especially people in the artist world, tend to be self-employed. So what do you do in that case? We'll talk a little bit about another category that's not express entry, another category called the self-employed artist category that may work for some of you. Foreign work experience, if you have high skilled work experience outside of Canada, that can count. And this work experience, you can use self-employed work outside of Canada as well. If you have a spouse, their education, language, and Canadian work experience can count. Provincial nominee programs, we'll talk about them. They have to be express entry linked. It's not every provincial nominee program. It has to be express entry linked provincial nominee program. If you have that, then you get 600 points added to your score. Your previous study in Canada, if you have a bachelor's or master's at OCAD, that'll give you 30 points. Arranged employment. Now, you can't get arranged employment if you have an open work permit, like a postgrad work permit. You can get it if you have a labor market impact assessment, LMIA, or other employer-specific work permits. Right now, with the draw scores so high, we are sometimes looking at whether or not we can get these LMIAs for students as well. And it really depends on whether or not the skills that you have are specialized and the employer has trouble finding Canadians to do the job. Okay. Siblings, if you have Canadians or who are Canadians or permanent residents in Canada, can give you a few points. If you're fluent in French, that can be a major boost, and you may be able to get invited to apply very easily if you're fluent in French. And finally, trade certification, that's for people in the construction trades for the most part. Okay. So taking a look at all this, some of you may be in a very good position, but a lot of you may need to do some work. Right now, unfortunately, the points have been very, very high for the general draws, the highest ever. And one of the main reasons for this is because of the new category-based draws. So, you know, in express entry history, normally it had been that everybody in the pool can get an invitation to apply. They look at whoever has the highest points for everybody in the pool, and they invite you to apply. They still do that. However, they have now started doing these category-based draws where they also start inviting special people. And because they're doing these category-based draws, the amount of positions they have for general draws are much smaller. And as their inventory grows, express entry, they describe it as skimming the cream. So they take the top people who have the top scores and they keep going down. Now, if it is that the amount of people you're selecting for overall is not as large as normal because you have other draws, then that's why the numbers become higher and higher. Okay. So what are some of these category-based draws? These category-based draws are draws where they will only invite people in specific categories to apply with them. Okay, so some of them is the French language. So if you have a CLB 7 in French, you could be invited for that. Healthcare occupations, STEM, which is science and technology and engineering, mathematics occupations, trade occupations, transport occupations, agriculture and agri-foods. Okay, here's a list for more information. Unfortunately, nothing in the arts for their category-based draws. That means a lot of you, if you don't have other things in here, will be in the general draws. The general draws lately have been, the points have been over 500, which is extraordinarily high. So we can look at other options for you guys as well. which we will also talk about.
Right. So as Elizabeth mentioned, there are other options for ways to get points, either in express entry or for different programs. And the ways that you can get points through express entry are through the provincial nominee programs, also called PNPs. So PNPs are programs where the province has made an agreement with the federal government so that they have the ability to select people that they want to get permanent residence in their province. So Ontario's provincial nominee program is called the OINP, and the OINP has several different types of streams. The express entry streams are linked to the express entry system. So these streams work where if you receive a nomination from the OINP through the express entry streams, it can add 600 extra points to your express entry score, which basically assures that you're going to be able to apply for permanent residence. So how do they work? So in Ontario, you can't just go and apply to the express entry OINP streams. First, you actually have to be in the express entry pool. So you have to qualify for one of the pools, one of the streams that Elizabeth described earlier, and then you wait to receive a notification of interest from Ontario. So you can be in the pool, and then only if Ontario is interested in you, then they'll send you a notification of interest. So who are they going to be giving out those notifications of interest to? There are 3 categories that they've identified. So the first is the human capital stream. And in order to qualify for that stream, you need to have a bachelor's degree. It doesn't have to be a bachelor's degree from Canada. It can be from overseas. But since most of you, since you're at OCAD, you might be getting that bachelor's degree from Canada. That works as well. They also specify particular things they're interested in. So for example, even before these new category-based draws came around, the human capital stream prioritized people in tech. They can also specify other types of applicants they're going to invite, like people with job offers or people who have certain work experience. The next stream is the French-speaking stream. So this is for people with a bachelor's degree and a high level of French, which is a CLB 7 and a CLB 6 in English could be invited. And then the third one is targeting people in the skilled trades. So if you're in one of these identified construction trades and you've been working in that occupation for a year, you don't need a bachelor's degree as long as you have a work permit and you've been working for 1 year in a skilled trade. And then OINP also has streams that aren't connected to express entry at all. So OINP basically has their own pool, and these are called the expression of interest streams. So these streams have different requirements than the express entry linked streams, and they also have a different application process. So for these streams, you don't have to have an express entry profile, and the process of applying is different. So you use what's called the expression of interest system. So if you qualify through one of the programs, the first step is putting yourself into the OINP pool for the particular program that you qualify for. Then you have to wait to be selected through the notification of interest system. So you get into the pool, you're waiting for Ontario to do a draw, and then they give you a notification of interest and you can apply to get your nomination certificate. After that, you can then apply for PR. So Ontario does do OINP draws, but they don't announce them beforehand. So it's best to get into the pool as soon as possible once you qualify, because you can't get an invitation if you're not in the pool. If you do get selected, you get the notification of interest, then you apply to get your nomination. Once that goes through, you apply for PR, as I said. So where the express entry link streams is you're into the express entry pool and you might get selected by Ontario. These streams, you're applying to the OINP, you're registering your expression of interest, and then you're going through the notification of interest stage, and then you're applying for PR. So the streams themselves in the OINP EOI streams are also a little bit different. They give points differently than express entry, so different factors are scored. So some streams require you to have a job offer, which I'll get into in a minute. And then there's also other streams like the PhD and the master's stream that don't require job offers. So there are, as I said, there's PhD and master's streams, which could qualify in your case, because if you're a student at OCAD, you might be doing your bachelor's, you might be getting a master's degree. And to qualify for those streams, you need to apply within 2 years of graduation from your program. So that means you have to register your expression of interest, you have to receive an invitation from the province, and you have to apply for nomination before it's been 2 years since you've graduated. So if you've completed a master's or a PhD from Ontario, don't wait around, register your expression of interest right away so that you don't miss any potential draws. The nice thing about these streams is you also don't need a job offer. But you do need to be looking to enter the labor market. So if you did your master's and then you're just about to go and do your PhD, this is not the stream for you. You can't do the master's stream. You have to wait until you're done studying completely to be able to qualify for the master's stream. And then you need to, as I mentioned earlier, you need to be selected through the EOI system. You'll be given a notification of interest. You have to provide all the documentations to prove everything that you've mentioned in your expression of interest, and you only have 14 days to do that, so it can be very tight, but it's a good way to get around if you don't have points under the express entry pools. And then I can also talk a bit about the employer-based streams. So these are also not express entry. They're also the expression of interest OINP streams. And they're based on having a job offer. So you as the applicant need to meet certain requirements, and then your employer also needs to meet certain requirements. So I can go through a few of them. For all of these streams, the business that's supporting your application needs to have been in business for at least 3 years. If it's inside of the GTA, they have to show that their gross income in the last fiscal year was 1 million and that they have 5 full-time Canadian or PR employees. And if it's outside of the GTA, they have to make $500,000 in income and have at least 3 full-time Canadian or PR employees. And the job offer itself has to be full-time and permanent. Permanent means no end date on your contract. There are a few different streams within this area. So there's the international student stream. So that means you've completed your program of study in Ontario and you've applied for the stream within 2 years of graduating, and you have to have graduated from an eligible program. That means you've either done a 2-year program or you've done a 1-year postgraduate program from an eligible school, where an admission requirement was that you had to have a degree to be qualified to enter the program. So keep that in mind. You also need a high-skilled job offer, and you need to be paid at least what's considered the low wage for your occupation according to your location of employment. The next one is the skilled worker. So for this stream, you need to have 2 years of work experience in the last 5 years in that same occupation as your job offer. The work experience doesn't have to have been in Canada, and it has to be high-skilled. The salary offered has to meet the median wage. And this one actually doesn't have any education requirements, so it can provide some flexibility there, but you'll be qualifying with bachelor's or master's from OCAD. And then the last one is the in-demand job offer stream. So the ONP has a list of occupations that qualify for this program. It's actually a very specific list, and it does include some low-skilled job offers and positions as well. So you could qualify for this, or for example, maybe your spouse, if they're in a low-skilled position, they could potentially qualify for this program. You need at least 9 months of experience in Ontario in that occupation, but it can be with a different employer, and you need to be making at least the median wage level salary for that occupation.
So as Mary had said, all of these options, if you are either married or in a common law relationship where you've lived with someone for at least a year in a conjugal relationship, and your spouse is also in Canada, they might be able to qualify for some of the things even easier or before you can, okay? So if you have a partner, then what we normally do is we would want to meet with both you and your partner together and see what the team together can do, all right? Okay, so let's talk about something else. One more thing option that I wanted to present to you, and the options that we're presenting today, there are some of the more common ones for people such as yourself, but it's the tip of the iceberg as to what is out there. What we're providing to you today is not advice, it's information. It's general information about what's out there. it's very important for each of you to also know specifically and have a plan for yourself. But in terms of the self-employed category for artists, this is something that we often use for artists who you may have had your own work experience. You may have had your own business. So if you've been self-employed for at least 2 years in the past 5 years, either self-employed or you're working at a world-class level, okay, then we can you may be able to qualify for this category. You also have to show that you will be able to make significant contribution to cultural life in Canada, and that you will be able to support yourself in your art in Canada. If you're able to do this, then you can apply for permanent residence. Now, previously, this application was quite fast. Oftentimes, we had results in a year. Lately, though, it was stretched to 3 years. Now, probably we're looking at a year, 2 years, maybe. But in any case, sometimes this might be the only option that's out there. And if you have your postgrad work permit, you can continue to work while waiting for your permanent residence to be decided. Okay, so this might be something that might work for some of you. Okay, now we've talked a lot about the different sort of permanent residence options, etc. What do you now do? Practically speaking, what do you need to do?
Right. So the first piece, the first step is to have a plan as to what you need to do to get to your immigration goals, not only a short-term plan, but also a long-term plan. If you're planning on getting PR eventually, you need to make sure that you're on the right track from day one.
And so once you have that consultation, it's oftentimes that you will likely need to do something as well. You may need to really study and take, study for those exams for your IELTS or CELPIP. Maybe you may need to do another program, maybe not, depends on your situation. Maybe you need to see if you can get enough time on your work permit to get the work experience that you need. So first, make sure you plan. Second, execution, carry out your plan. Okay.
And while you're doing that plan, you need to make sure that you stay in status while you're here in Canada and that you don't misrepresent. So you keep a close eye on those expiry dates on your study permit and your postgrad work permit. Tell the truth to immigration on every application. Lying or providing incorrect information on an application can result in a 5-year ban from Canada.
Now, if your application is rejected, hopefully this does not happen to you. But if it is rejected and you don't have a lawyer yet, make sure you contact a lawyer right away. Sometimes people think, oh, I'll just call the call center. Well, the call center for immigration is not like the call center for Amazon, okay? It's not like you call them and they're really there to really help you out. No, they represent immigration, and that is not necessarily representing you. Oftentimes, also, these are not immigration officers. They're call center agents that tend to give out erroneous information all of the time. And sometimes, they'll just say, okay, you call them, hey, this happened to me, it's really unfair. And they'll say, okay, I'll write a note for you, or you write a note for, and just send it to immigration. And you think, oh, fantastic, I'm just going to write a letter to immigration and they'll fix it. Wrong. Okay, if you don't know why and how it is that maybe the decision is wrong or maybe it's right, if you don't know how it is that it violates the law as to what the decision is or not, and you just write something to immigration and you get a decision back saying no, the decision stands, That's your one kick at the can for a reconsideration. And if you then come to a lawyer like me and say, hey, Elizabeth, I did this, now what do I do? I can no longer go back to immigration to get a reconsideration, because you only get one chance for reconsideration. Federal court, if you wanted to go to court and have an impartial judge take a look at the decision, you only have very limited time. If the decision is made in Canada, it's only 15 days from the date of the decision, or if it's outside of Canada, it's 60 days, okay? Sometimes as well, timelines for restoration of status, or timeline as to when you can apply for postgrad work permits, also very short. So please do not waste any time if your application is rejected. Hopefully, you would have hired a good lawyer from the very beginning so that your application is not rejected. But if it is, make sure you contact a lawyer right away, not a consultant. A consultant cannot go to federal court. They don't have the legal training. So make sure you contact a good lawyer. All right, so here is our contact information. If you want to come for a consultation, do let us know that you're coming from OCAD. We do give OCAD students a discounted consultation fee of $100. So let us know. And let's go over some questions as well.
Okay. So in the Q&A, we have some good questions. We have someone who has been approved for study permit extension, and they gave them a new study permit until 2027, but they didn't give them a visa. The visitor visa is on their previous passport and it expires in about 40 days. What should they do?
So when you apply for an extension in Canada, it's not the same as when you apply for an application for a study permit outside of Canada at a visa post. When you apply for extension inside Canada, you only get the study permit sent to you. Then what happens is you have to then do another application for a visa. The visa allows you to enter Canada. Some people need visas, some people don't need visas. If you're from a country that doesn't require a visa, you have your ETA. If you're from a country that needs a visa, then if you wanted to leave Canada and the US, you can even go to the US. If all you're doing is going to the US and coming back, you don't even need a visa. But if you're going anywhere outside of Canada and US and you want to come back, then you need a visa to return. So if your visa is about to expire, then what you'll do is with your new study permit, you can then apply for a new visa, and that visa would be likely expiring at the same time as your current study permit or work permit.
Great. Okay. Hello, I took a semester off for fall 20 due to COVID-19. Is there a chance I will be denied postgrad work permit in this case?
A very good question. It depends on whether or not you maintained your status and whether or not you had authorized leave. So if you had to take a semester off, hopefully you notified the school that you had to take that off and you got authorized leave from the school. If you did, then you should be okay. If not, however, it could have been because schools do have to report when someone does not attend class and not actively study. It could be that you may have already been in the records of losing your status. Do come for a consultation and we can take a look at your situation in that case.
And what do I do if I did not receive my postgrad work permit within 90 days?
Okay, so just to be very clear, it's not that you have to receive your postgrad work permit within 90 days. It's that you have to apply for your postgrad work permit within 90 days of the completion of your program. Okay, so as long as you submitted right now, work permits often take 4 to 5 months. As long as you've submitted your postgrad work permit while your study permit is still valid within the 90 days, you can work right away. The immigration office, they try to be helpful, but they're so not sometimes. They send out this letter to you after you submitted your work permit saying you can work until such and such date. Okay, the reality is you can work, but it's not until that date that they randomly put on the letter, okay? They put on that date on the letter because they estimate that you should get your work permit. However, currently work permit processing times long past that date. The real law is you can continue to work until you get a decision on your work permit, okay? So as long as you apply, not receive your postgrad work permit, apply for your postgrad work permit within the 90 days, and while your study permit is still valid, you're good. You can start working and continue to work until you get a decision on your work permit application.
Okay, so if my study is hybrid and I take all of my classes online in Canada, will I qualify for a postgrad work permit? I'm in Canada now, and do I have to go in person for 50% of the time?
Oh, this is a good question. It's a difficult question to answer. Most of the time, the officers will check your transcripts. The officers don't know if you go in class or, on or stay online. Who knows about these things? But if it is that your classes say that it's online classes, then the officers will assume that's online. If it's in-person classes and there's no other indication that it's in person, then they're going to assume that it's in-person classes, that it's online, that they're going to assume that it's in person. And that's basically, I think, how it goes. Although, officers may have other ways to investigate. Maybe they might go to the school and check the websites. I highly doubt, though, that anybody's going to be monitoring every class to see if someone shows up in class, essentially, or takes a hybrid. But essentially, if it is that you are, just don't take these online classes more than like 50% of your time is what I'm saying. Okay.
Okay. I'm wondering if I did my undergrad at BC and then I'm doing my master's at OCAD in Ontario, if I want to work and live in BC after, does that mean to get a PR, I can start applying anywhere in Canada, but I can only do so through express entry? Is that correct? I think they're maybe asking about PN.
So in Canada, we have programs that are federal programs like express entry, like the self-employed category for artists. Those are federal programs. And as long as you do not indicate that you intend to live in Quebec, then you're fine. Okay. For anyone who does not speak French, if you want to get PR, I'm telling you right now, going to Quebec it's almost impossible to get permanent residence in Quebec. Okay. It's not to say that you can never live in Quebec. Just don't intend to live in Quebec until you get your PR. Okay. So federal programs, you can go to BC, you can go anywhere, express entry, then there is provincial nominee programs, and every province has its own program. We went through the Ontario program because we're in Ontario and most of you will be in Ontario. But BC has its own provincial nominee program. Every province has their own provincial nominee program. If you intend to go to a particular province and you want to apply for a provincial nominee program, you should look at the provincial nominee program for that particular province where you are going to live. Because the provincial nominee programs they guard their programs very jealously against people who they think will intend to go to another province. Whoever is applying to a province's particular program is supposed to intend to live in that province. Okay. Every province has their own programs. BC, it doesn't necessarily have as good a master's program as Ontario, in that Ontario doesn't matter what master's program you do, you don't need a job offer. BC, there are some very specific ones where you may not need a job offer, but most of them you may need a job offer. It's not as open as the Ontario one. So it depends on what the province is, but you are able to access BC's provincial nominee program if you decide to go to BC. Which one is better? We need to take a look at your circumstances and make a plan for you.
Great. Okay. Do points for education, in brackets 3 years, still count if the education was part-time?
Yes, yes, as long as you have the final degree, yes, it certainly can count for education purposes. Not necessarily for the postgrad, you likely won't get the postgrad, but yes, we can count it in the end for education, for express entry, for example.
Great. For relevant Canadian work experience, does it count if I had work experience during university from 2017 to 2021?
Not if you're looking at Canadian work experience for express entry points. For express entry points, it's if the work experience cannot be when you are a full-time student in Canada.
Okay. Can I get permanent residency if I get a job in a different field than my current major?
Yes, absolutely. The government doesn't really care about you getting a job in your field, okay? The only time it matters is if you're saying that you are working in a certain occupation, and that occupation, you have to have a certain education credential in order to do it. For example, if you say you're a lawyer, you have to have graduated from a law school, otherwise you can't be a lawyer, okay? So unless it's something like that, and we go through the occupation codes very carefully for the government, you can basically work in any high skill job and still qualify for almost all of the different programs where they want high skill positions.
Okay. Is a technical artist 3D rigging considered STEM? It's a good question.
I'd have to take a look at what it is that you do. I believe some of the I'll have to take a look at the knock codes. It really depends. I don't really know rigging what that is. You'll have to explain it to me more in a consultation, or explain it to Mary. But some of the different sort of it may be, but we'll have to take a look. Yeah.
It depends on the duties.
Yeah.
Okay, so should I work for 1 year to complete my 1-year Canadian experience class before applying for ONP master's stream, or should I apply right after I complete my master's from OCAD?
That's a question that we'll have to go through in a consultation. It really depends on, you can do both. You can do both master a provincial nominee program and express entry. We have a lot of clients who hedge their bets, but we really do need to have a consultation with you and sit down with you and go over a plan.
And we have another person asking about 3D careers considered STEM. Yeah, we would have to know what the duties are for that.
Yeah, and we'd have to go through that.
Was wondering if you need to submit financial documents and employment letter for TRV after postgrad work permit approval.
It's nice if you do it. I can't really advise on a specific application. Sometimes, oftentimes it's good to have that. It may not be necessary to do it. It depends on the circumstances.
Is it possible or advisable to apply for a postgrad work permit before you officially complete your program, or must you wait to officially complete before applying?
You cannot apply for a postgrad work permit until you've completed your program. But you can apply immediately after you complete your program. Normally what you want to do is you want to show your transcripts. And it's nice if you can get that letter from the school stating what program you've completed.
Yep. Are we eligible to work over 20 hours while being a full-time student?
So it really depends on the circumstances. We're talking about off-campus work, because if you're on campus, you can work full-time on campus. Off-campus, last year there was a policy where if you submitted your study permit, or if you held a study permit valid on October 7th, I believe, of last year, you can work until the end of this year full-time, as long as it's on that original study permit that was valid, or you had submitted the application before October 7th. Co-op, you can also work based on a co-op, but that's only for co-op programs. Just because you have a co-op work permit doesn't mean that you can work full-time in a job that's not co-op. Okay. So, it depends on the circumstances, but for the most part, normally off-campus work without a work permit, without the special circumstances, is 20 hours a week while you're studying. You can work full-time during your scheduled breaks.
This one connects to something you discussed earlier, but someone's asking, what if I only studied part-time during COVID?
COVID, there are some COVID rules. If it is that your classes were canceled because of COVID, you might be okay. But if your classes weren't canceled and you were just, sick, that might have an issue. In general, if you have been part-time, it could very well be an issue for post-grad work permit. Make sure that you come in and we can take a look at your circumstances.
Okay. Could you please elaborate the OINP graduate stream program and scoring factors? Do we get points for OCAD U for regionalization? Is it 12 points?
So there's a whole scoring that's different, and that's why we didn't go. So it'll take us an hour to go through the whole scoring for that. A part of the scoring is where did you study? OCAD is in Toronto, so you really don't get any points for that. It's like Toronto is 0, GTA you get a few points. Outside of GTA you get more points. If you're in Northern Ontario you get the most points. I think in OCAD, if you're in the Toronto, for location it's 0, but they also look at a lot of other things as well. So come by, we'll take a look and see if the master's program, if you have a opportunity to go through that or not. Sometimes you put yourself into 2 or 3 different pools and see whichever one you can win the lottery on. I had a client once come to me, and her score for express entry at that point was like 416, and the draws were at 480s for express entry. When she came to me, I said, I don't know that you have a great chance to get invited for express entry. But she said to me, you know what? My mother said, you can't win the lottery if you don't buy a lottery ticket. So put me into the pool anyway. I'm like, all right. And then, suddenly something happened. The policy changed, and she got invited to apply within a month. And you know what? I kind of use that story sometimes. You never know. You can't win the lottery if you don't buy the lottery ticket. So it might be worth it. During COVID, before the draws were at like 470s, all of a sudden COVID hit, and the minister just decided to invite everybody in the Canadian Experience class pool, and the lowest one was something like 72 or something like that for the score. So you never know. We can kind of predict what is likely to happen, but you never know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I will graduate in June 2024, and my study permit will graduate in July 2024. I'm wondering if they mean maybe expire.
Yeah.
And I've already applied for a study permit once. Can I apply for a study permit again?
You can apply for a study permit as many times as you need to apply. The officer, whether or not they will issue another study permit, they may. Normally, study permits are supposed to be issued to end 90 days after your program is scheduled to end, to allow you time to apply for your postgrad work permit. But if you don't get your study permit by that time, you can still apply for your postgrad work permit if your study permit ends a month after you're supposed to have received the completion letter. It's not when you convocate. It's when you get the first notice from the school that you've completed your program. Then you can still apply. So you may not need to wait for the new study permit. You can apply as long as your study permit is still good and you've completed your program.
Okay. Can I still leave and enter Canada during the time when I'm waiting to receive what I think they mean is my postgrad work permit?
Okay, that's a good question. Here's the situation. If you're not on implied status and you come back before your status ends and you've applied for your postgrad work permit, You probably can do that, and the officer will likely let you in. But the problem comes if you have completed your program, you've applied for your postgrad work permit, and it goes beyond the 90 days. It goes beyond when your study permit expires. You come back after that time, your implied status ends and you won't be able to work. So normally, it's good if you can wait until your postgrad work permit is issued. Sometimes I have people applying at the border if they can't wait, and you can just get your postgrad work permit right there and then. Other times, if you need to travel, you come back before your status ends, and so you're coming back before you're on implied status. That's also good as well.
This is a follow-up question to what if I don't receive my postgrad work permit in 90 days? If I get a postgrad work permit in 4 to 5 months and I continue to work, will this 4 to 5 months be calculated in CEC?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. I'm studying as a full-time student, a 2 years master's from OCAD in design. My course finishes in May 2025. Can I apply for a postgrad work permit before 90 days? And can I apply for PR in the express entry pool in any of the categories you've mentioned after the postgrad work permit, soon after I graduate?
Well, when you can apply for PR, we'd have to have a consult with you to look at your circumstances. So you can apply for postgrad work permit anytime after you've completed your program and before the 90 days, and while your study permit is still valid.
Great.
By the way, guys, if it is after the 90 days, there is a way to still apply for the postgrad work permit. We have to file a restoration of status if it's before the 180 days, but you will likely not be able to work while waiting for your work permit. So do come to us if it's that circumstance. Used to be the rule was 90 days, and then the government extended it to 180 days, sometimes I think because students were getting rejections and they needed to refile or they were doing something wrong. So it was a second chance for people to do it. But you can't work during that time and there's restoration of status, etc. Okay. So I like to tell you the rule that to remember in your head as to when you should apply, but don't give up if it's rejected or something happens and you weren't able. Do come and see us. We can see what we can do.
Is attending high school in Canada, does that count as previous study experience?
No, not for express entry points.
Does volunteer work with a Canadian company count towards any work experience, or should it always be paid employment?
Always has to be paid employment. Volunteer work does not count at all.
Okay, and we have another COVID study thing. I had to take 1.5 years of online university due to COVID. I'm graduating at the end of my 4th year this year. Would that 1.5 years be problematic for my postgrad work permit?
Due to COVID, it may be okay, especially and it's only 1.5 years of a 4-year program. I think that should be fine anyway. But COVID, there are special COVID rules for classes that were taken during COVID online. So you should be okay in the circumstances. But, this is just limited information. So to be sure, come by and we'll take a look.
Is it enough for leave of absence from school? Is it enough to have a record that I submitted a leave of absence application form to the school and they accepted it?
No. It's not a leave of absence application. You have to actually get the school to give you authorized leave. So maybe Liddell, maybe you might be able to let us know what's this circumstance, like how do they get authorized leave from the school?
Yeah, so for the leave of absence, if you were to submit the request to our office, we would report it to the office registrar. So when you actually apply for your post-graduation work permit or study permit extension, you would need to request for that information from the registrar's office. So if you have any questions, please contact our office.
So then the leave of absence is like an authorized leave, essentially, right? So if they submit it and the school says, yes, we grant it, then that's the authorized leave.
That's correct.
Got it. Thank you. That's great.
Okay, is the Digital Future Program considered one of the NOC fields?
I have no idea what the Digital Future Program is. We'll have to take a look and you'll have to give us more detail.
I'm an undergraduate first year student applying for SIN number mid-August, but I didn't get the SIN. I wrote the form. What do you suggest I do about my condition? I need to get a part-time job to balance my spending.
I don't know why they don't issue the SIN. Sometimes it's the officers don't press a certain button when they issue the a study permit or something, or sometimes the study permit has an issue where it says you're not allowed to work or something like that, and you may have to get a changed. I don't know the reason why they didn't give you the SIN. You should ask the Service Canada officer as to why they didn't issue the social insurance number. And you may need to get your study permit amended.
Can a part-time university job be counted for points in the Express Entry program?
So it depends on what we're looking at. Sometimes if someone is working while they're studying, we can use that work experience for the federal skilled worker class to get you to qualify for permanent residence. But because it's work experience that you would have gained while you're a full-time student, it doesn't count as points, Canadian work experience points, to give you points for the ITA draws. Okay, so you might be able to use it to get you into the pool, but not necessarily to get out of the pool.
I'm currently studying in my master's program. If I want to pursue a PhD, when should I apply for a postgrad work permit? After I finish my master's or after the PhD?
That's a very good very good question. Oftentimes I see students wasting the postgrad work permit by you're going to do a PhD and applying for the postgrad after the master's just because you can. If you do that, it could be that when you graduate from a PhD, because you already used up your once in a lifetime postgrad work permit, you're not going to be able to get another postgrad work permit when you graduate from the PhD. You won't be able to stay in Canada afterwards. So, it's very important that you have a proper plan as to how you're going to get permanent residence, how you're going to, get your work experience, how to apply, when to apply, etc., and go for a consultation before you take that step.
If my bachelor degree comes with a STEM program, but I'm having an arts program for my master, do I still get points in a STEM category?
It really depends on which, first of all, what we're looking at. Sometimes for the master stream or the OIMP streams, international student streams, you do look at what the education program was and whether or not it has points. But in other programs like Express Entry, they don't care about what education program it was. So, I don't really know what program it is, so we'll have to take a look at that and see whether or not we can classify that as to which category.
Historically speaking, is it hard or easy to get PR now?
That's a very broad question. Some people, it's very easy. And some people, it's harder than ever. It depends. And it depends on how much people prepare for it. The earlier you can prepare and plan, the easier it can be in the end.
Can I travel outside of Canada after applying to postgrad work permit?
I think we already answered that. Yeah.
Does the 1 year of experience after graduation need to be continuous? What if I have a 2-month gap between my two jobs? Would that affect me to enter the pool for Express Entry?
So to qualify for Canadian experience class, it does not need to be continuous. It does not need to be in one occupation. That's only for the federal skilled worker class. So it's okay if you have a gap, 2 months, it's fine.
Great. Can a paid internship be counted towards work experience in Canada?
Yes, if it's a paid internship, it very well could be counted. But it depends on, if it's high skilled, whether or not it was when you're a full-time student. So it depends on which program you're applying to. But internship, if it's paid, it's still work.
And then last question, if I only have one class in the last semester of my undergrad studies, will that have an impact on my application for a work permit?
If it's in the last semester, you're okay. Last semester, you can be a part-time student. You can still qualify for the postgrad work permit. You can also work in your last semester if you're a part-time student as well. Only the last semester. Wow,
Okay.
we did it. We answered all the questions. Awesome.
Great. I guess the time's almost up, correct, Elizabeth?
Yes, I think we're done. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So if you have any questions, please email our office at international@ocu.ca. But just keep in mind that we're not authorized to give you advice on the PR status. Okay, so if you have any question regarding that, you do have to contact Elizabeth or Mary. So thank you, Elizabeth and Mary, for taking the time out of your busy schedules. I know you guys are very busy and providing us with such insightful information. And thank you, everyone, for attending our info session today.
Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.